Ever get that feeling, like the world's kind of trying to knock you down?
Yeah, we've all been there. And that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive today. We're tackling resilience. That almost superpower some people have to bounce back. And not just from everyday stuff, but like the big things.
And that's what makes our guide today so fascinating. We're talking about Boris Cyrulnik.
Oh, he's an incredible.
He's often called like the world's top researcher on resilience.
Which is amazing in itself. But then you learn his story.
Right. It's not just research for him, it's personal.
Exactly. And we're lucky enough to be diving into these interview excerpts where he gets into all of it, the science, his own experiences. It's pretty powerful stuff.
And he really doesn't shy away from the hard stuff. I mean, escaping the Holocaust as a child, that's bound to shape how you see resilience. Absolutely. Okay, so let's get into it. He defines resilience as starting a new development after a trauma, which honestly sounds deceptively simple when you consider what we mean by trauma, right?
It really does. It's almost like saying, just start a new chapter after everything's been blown apart. But that's what Cyrulnik does so well. He breaks down how that starting over actually works.
And here's where it gets interesting, I think. He challenges this whole idea that some of us are just wired for resilience, like it's in our genes. He says genetics play a surprisingly small role.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? You'd think resilience would be like eye color or something, passed down. But Cyrulnik's research points to the environment, especially early on, as the biggest factor.
So wait, you're saying what happens in our childhood has a bigger impact than our genes when it comes to resilience?
That's exactly what he's saying. And it's a big deal. It completely shifts how we think about this whole thing.
It does. So then what's the key ingredient? If it's not all about genes, what is it?
Well, Cyrulnik talks a lot about securitization. Think of it like that feeling you get when, deep down, someone's got your back no matter what.
Okay, so more than just being safe, right? It's like emotional safety, a feeling.
Exactly. It's consistent love, a stable environment, a sense of belonging. It's knowing you're free to explore and you don't have to be constantly on guard.
Which makes me think about Cyrulnik's own experience escaping the Holocaust. Talk about the opposite of feeling secure.
And that experience is so central to his work because he saw firsthand how trauma, especially early trauma, can completely change a person's life.
That really makes you think about, like, the lasting impact of those early years. But what about those of us who, maybe didn't have that perfect childhood? Does that mean we're just stuck struggling with resilience?
Not at all. Not at all. Cyrulnik actually uses this great analogy. It's like a chess game, he says.
Okay.
The early moves are important, yeah, for sure. They kind of set the stage. But they're always good moves to make, throughout the whole game.
I like that.
It's not a done deal, is what he's saying.
Yeah, that's a really powerful way to think about it. It's not about being dealt a perfect hand. It's about, learning to play the hand you're dealt well. So how do we actually do that then? How do we make those good moves as adults?
Well, Cyrulnik, he's a huge believer in connecting with people, like really seeking out those people in our lives we trust, the ones we can talk to, lean on, who remind us we're not alone in all this.
That's so interesting because, it seems counterintuitive, right? Like, when I'm hurting, the last thing I want to do is be around people.
I know, right? It feels like you just want to retreat, but his research shows that actually just makes it worse. Isolation just amps up the suffering.
Wow.
Connecting with others, even if it feels hard, it can be like this superpower for building resilience.
Yeah.
It helps us process what we're going through, get different perspectives. Remember, we're not the only ones going through tough stuff.
So building those strong relationships is key. I want to shift gears a bit, though. Something else I thought was super interesting in Cyrulnik's work is how he talks about art.
Oh, yeah.
He mentions this high number of artists who've been through some really difficult things, and I'm curious, what's the connection there?
Well, it goes back to how amazing our brains are, how adaptable they are. They find these incredible ways to cope. Think about it. Art, whether it's painting, music, writing, it gives you an outlet, a way to work through trauma without being totally overwhelmed. It's controlled.
It's like you're taking all those feelings and turning them into something real, something you can actually understand.
Exactly. And the thing is, Cyrulnik doesn't think this is just for people who've experienced trauma. He says it's important for everyone. Exposing kids to different kinds of art when they're young, that's huge.
So it's not just about making art ourselves, but also about experiencing art made by other people.
Yes. It opens us up to different ways of looking at things, different experiences, and it builds empathy, which is so important for resilience.
And that actually leads perfectly into something I know you're really passionate about. how all of this plays into education, especially these days.
Oh, absolutely. It feels like there's this like constant anxiety in the air, right?
Yeah.
Globally, personally, everywhere you look. And as adults, we're feeling it, but kids are feeling it too.
So how do we actually prepare them? Give them the resilience they need to deal with all of, whatever life throws at them. How do we actually do that?
Well, Cyrillic has some pretty specific ideas. Like, he's really big on slowing things down.
Mm.
The pace of education these days is kind of relentless. He also thinks we need to bring in more art, which we were saying, and more sports, actually.
Yeah.
And he says we can't just try to shield kids from tough stuff completely.
That's interesting.
Like, they need to actually experience adversity to learn how to deal with it.
So it's like finding that sweet spot, right? Between being supportive, but also letting them face challenges, not trying to create this like perfect little bubble, because that's just not real life.
Exactly. He talks about the flow and reflex of life, like
Yeah.
the ocean.
Oh, I like that.
There are calm periods and storms. That's just how it works. And resilience is like learning to ride those waves, not just getting knocked over by them.
It makes you wonder, though, are we making it harder, even if we don't mean to? With how fast everything is today, all the pressure to be constantly on it. It's like we're trying to outrun the waves instead of, like you said, learning to surf.
It's the million-dollar question, right? I mean, Cyrillic seems to think so. He really believes we can help each other become more resilient. But he also sees how much our culture works against that. Like, we're obsessed with being productive and happy all the time. And that's just not sustainable.
It's true. It's like trying to force the ocean to be calm all the time. Instead of just accepting that it ebbs and flows. Maybe, like Cyrillic says, we just need to shift our perspective a little bit. Slow down. Remember that we're human and so are our kids. Embrace the rhythms instead of fighting them.
It's quite a thought.
Maybe that's the key to, really developing resilience in ourselves and in the next generation. It's like we're so busy trying to outrun the waves that we forget we can also learn to surf. There's this one quote from Cyrillic that I keep coming back to. He says, "The pain is inevitable, the suffering is optional." What do you make of that?
It's like he just sums it all up, doesn't he? So short, but it makes you think.
Right.
Saying, look, pain, it's just part of life, right?
Yeah.
Loss, disappointment, all that hard stuff, we're all going to face it. Is what makes us human. But here's the thing, the suffering part,
Yeah.
that's where we have a choice.
So it's like we can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we react to it.
Yes. And that's where resilience comes in. It's about using that pain, turning it into something that helps us grow, not letting it take over our whole lives.
And that's where all those tools we talked about come in, right? Having those strong relationships, finding ways to express ourselves like through art, and accepting that life's going to have ups and downs.
Exactly. It's not pretending the hard stuff isn't there, but knowing how to handle it, how to learn from it. And that's how we come out stronger on the other side.
One thing that really strikes me about Cyrillic's work is how hopeful it is. Like, he's not ignoring the tough stuff, but he's also giving us a way to deal with it, a toolbox almost.
A toolbox and like this belief that we've got what it takes, that we can survive, but even more than that, we can thrive, even when things are hard.
And that's what's so amazing about resilience, isn't it? It reminds us that we're not just victims of our circumstances. We can adapt, we can grow, and we can create a whole new path forward, even when it seems impossible.
It's powerful stuff.
It really is. And on that note, I think we'll leave you with Cyrillic's words to think about. The pain is inevitable, the suffering is optional. What in your own life, might you be turning from pain into suffering? And how can you use these incredible insights from Boris Cyrulnik to face your own journey with a little more resilience? Until next time, keep diving deep.